Imagine walking into a dance audition in America. You are surrounded by talented dancers. Everyone is there for the same reason: to earn a place. No one introduces you as Angelina Jolie's daughter. No one announces that your father is Brad Pitt. You are simply there to dance. According to people involved with the project, that is essentially what happened to Shiloh Jolie. In 2026, Shiloh appeared in the music video for K-pop artist Daeyoung's song, "What's a Girl to Do?" But the surprising part isn't that she appeared in a K-pop video. It's how she reportedly got there. Shiloh went through an open audition. She was simply handed a role because of her family. She auditioned as a dancer. And according to representatives involved with the project, the production team did not initially know that the young woman auditioning was the daughter of two of Hollywood's biggest stars. They saw a dancer. They saw someone who had trained, someone who could perform, someone who had to earn her place. And only later did they discover who she really was. That changes the story completely. Because for almost 20 years, the world has known Shiloh before she ever had the chance to decide how she wanted to be known. She was born into the Jolie Pitt family. Her childhood was photographed. Her public appearances became headlines. And almost every story about her eventually came back to the same question: what would Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie's daughter become? But this time, Shiloh wasn't walking into a room as their daughter. She was walking in as a dancer. And that distinction may be the most important part of her story. Because Shiloh's connection to dance didn't begin with this music video. It had been developing for years. Training, practicing, performing, exploring choreography. Now at 20, those years of work have led to something very different. A professional music project, a K-pop production, a stage where the audience can see her movement before they see her family name. So what happens when one of Hollywood's most famous children walks into a room? And nobody knows who she is. Is this simply another celebrity appearance? Or is it the clearest sign, yet that Shiloh is building an identity of her own? Because sometimes the strongest way to step out of a famous family's shadow isn't to run from it. It's to walk into a room where nobody knows your name and earn your place anyway. For most of her life, the world knew Shiloh through a famous family name: Jolie, Pitt. But in the world of dance, another name began to appear. We shouldn't assume exactly what that name means to Shiloh personally. Only she can explain that. But professionally, it creates an interesting separation. The audience doesn't need to know whose daughter she is. They only need to see the performer. A dancer. And Shiloh's connection to dance didn't suddenly appear in 2026. It had been developing for years. While her parents built careers on movie screens, Shiloh was drawn toward another kind of performance. Not acting, not red carpets, not celebrity interviews. Dance. She trained. She practiced. She performed. And over time, people began paying attention to her movement rather than her family. That distinction matters when you are born into the Jolie Pitt family. Shiloh never had the luxury of complete anonymity. A family outing could become a headline. A photograph could become a story. And anything she did could quickly be connected to Angelina Jolie or Brad Pitt. But dance offered something different. A space where the work could come first. A place where the person in front of the camera mattered more than the surname behind her. And Shiloh's journey eventually moved beyond simply learning choreography. In 2025, she was reported to have choreographed a performance connected to an Isabelle Marant event in Paris, using the name She. That was an important step. Performing someone else's choreography requires skill. Creating choreography requires something more. It requires musicality, interpretation, confidence, and a point of view. Suddenly, the story becomes less about a famous daughter trying to escape Hollywood, and more about a young artist discovering her own language. Then came the K-pop opportunity, an open audition, a competitive selection process, and Shiloh reportedly making it through to the final round. The fascinating part is that the project didn't begin with her family name. It began with her ability to dance. And that changes the question. Instead of asking, what is Brad Pitt's daughter doing in a K-pop video? The better question is, what can Shiloh do when nobody is looking at her parents? Because for once, the answer may be visible on the dance floor. She doesn't have to reject her family. She doesn't have to erase the Jolie Pitt name. She simply has to step forward as herself. And perhaps that is what she represents. Not a rejection, not necessarily a rebellion, but a space where Shiloh can be seen for what she creates, rather than for the family she was born into. This is where the story gets more interesting. Being the daughter of Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt can open doors. But an audition is different. You still have to walk into the room. You still have to learn the choreography. And you still have to prove that you belong. According to reports surrounding Daeyoung's What's a Girl to Do music video, Shiloh went through an open audition in the United States. The casting process was looking for dancers, not celebrity children, not Hollywood royalty. Dancers, and Shiloh reportedly made it through to the final round. If the people involved did not initially know who she was, then her famous family name was the first thing they saw. They saw she, a young dancer auditioning for a professional project. And that is what makes this different from a typical celebrity appearance. Shiloh could have entered entertainment through Hollywood. Her parents could have introduced her to directors. She could have built a career around her famous family. Instead, this particular story began with an audition. And dance is a demanding way to prove yourself. When the music starts, there is nowhere to hide. You have to remember the choreography. Stay in rhythm. Control your movement. And keep going when the routine becomes difficult. A famous last name cannot perform the choreography for you. That doesn't mean Shiloh's background is irrelevant. It isn't. She has had access to professional training and opportunities that most aspiring dancers will never have. That privilege is part of her story. But so is the work she has chosen to put into that opportunity. Reports indicate that Shiloh had already been training for years before this project came along. So their audition wasn't necessarily the beginning. It may have been the result of everything that came before it. The practice, the classes, the performances, the choreography, the hours spent learning how to move with other dancers. Then came their opportunity to audition. And she reportedly made it through. That's the detail worth remembering. Not that Shiloh Jolie is famous. Everyone already knows that. But that she entered a project where her family name apparently was the first thing being evaluated. Her dancing was. And that creates an unusual situation for someone born into Hollywood royalty. For most of her childhood, people knew who Shiloh was before they knew anything about her. Now the order was reversed. First came the dancer, then came the name. And perhaps that's why this moment feels bigger than one music video. It suggests that Shiloh isn't simply looking for another way to be famous. She may be looking for a way to create something that belongs to her. Because there is a difference between being famous and being recognized for a skill. The first is something Shiloh inherited. The second is something she has to build. The K-pop music video may have introduced Shiloh to a new audience. But it did not introduce her to dance. That journey had already been underway for years. Long before Shiloh appeared alongside professional dancers, she was spending time in dance studios, learning choreography and developing her own style. Then in 2022, videos of Shiloh dancing began circulating online. One performance drew particular attention after professional dancer Hamilton Evans shared choreography featuring her. Suddenly, people who had known Shiloh only as Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie's daughter were watching her for a completely different reason. She could dance, but one viral performance does not make a career. Training does. Discipline does. And the willingness to keep improving when the cameras are gone. Shiloh continued developing her skills. She worked with professional dancers. She learned demanding choreography. She performed with other dancers. And eventually, she began moving beyond simply following someone else's movements. She started exploring choreography herself. In 2025, she was reported to have choreographed a performance connected to an Isabelle Marant event in Paris, using the name She. That was a significant progression. A dancer who performs choreography demonstrates technical ability. A dancer who helps create choreography has to make creative decisions. She has to understand music, timing, movement, space, and the connection between dancers. It requires another level of confidence. Then came 2026. The open audition. The Kpop project. Their opportunity to perform in Dayoung's music video, What's a Girl to Do? To someone discovering the story today, it might look like Shiloh suddenly appeared in a K-pop video. But the public simply hadn't seen most of the work that came before it. They didn't see the training. They didn't see the rehearsals. They didn't see the years of learning. They saw the finished performance. And that is often how success looks from their outside. Sudden, easy, overnight. But from their inside, it can look completely different. Hours of practice, small improvements, mistakes, repetition, and then another audition, another performance, another opportunity. That's what makes Shiloh's story interesting. She was born with something most dancers spend years trying to obtain. A name the entire world already recognizes. But she appears to be pursuing something that cannot simply be inherited. Skill and dance may have given her something Hollywood never could. A way to communicate without explaining her family. She doesn't have to talk about Brad Pitt. She doesn't have to talk about Angelina Jolie. She doesn't have to explain her childhood. She can simply move. And the audience decides what they see. That may be why the K-pop appearance feels like more than a random celebrity cameo. It is another step in a progression. Training, performance, choreography, professional work. And somewhere along that journey, the question changed. It was no longer, what will Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie's daughter become? It became, what can Shiloh create for herself? For viewers watching the music video, the reveal is simple. The dancer on screen is Shiloh Jolie, Angelina Jolie's daughter, Brad Pitt's daughter, one of the most recognizable young women in Hollywood. But according to representatives involved with the project, that was how the production team initially saw her. They knew her as She, a dancer who had auditioned for the project, a performer who had made it through the selection process. And reportedly, they didn't immediately know that the young woman in front of them belonged to one of Hollywood's most famous families. That detail is what makes the story so compelling. Because for almost her entire life, Shiloh has experienced the opposite. People knew who she was before they knew anything about her. The cameras knew her family. The headlines knew her family. The public knew her family. But inside this project, the order was different. First came the dancer. Then came their identity. And according to reports, the production team only learned who Shiloh was after filming had taken place. Think about that. A young woman who grew up under constant attention managed to enter a professional project without her famous family name being the headline. That doesn't erase her privilege. It doesn't mean she entered the room under the same circumstances as every aspiring dancer. Shiloh has had access to professional training, resources, and opportunities that most people simply don't have. That reality matters. But so does the other side of the story. She still had to learn the choreography. She still had to perform. She still had to fit into the production. And she still had to show that she belonged on camera. The Jolie Pitt name could attract attention, but it couldn't perform the choreography for her. The dancing had to do that. And perhaps that's the most revealing part of this entire story. For years, the world has asked what Shiloh would do with their enormous legacy she was born into. Would she become an actress? Would she follow her parents into Hollywood? Would she build a career around celebrity? Instead, she appears to be exploring something different. A world where the work can come before the name. A world where she can simply be she. And that is why this moment matters. People aren't just discovering another member of the Jolie Pitt family. They are discovering a young dancer who has been developing her craft quietly. Of course, one music video doesn't tell us what Shiloh will do with the rest of her life. She may pursue dance professionally. She may move into choreography. She may explore another creative field. We don't know yet. And perhaps that's exactly why this moment is interesting. Shiloh is finally old enough to experiment without having to announce a final destination. She can try something, learn from it, move on, try something else. Because growing up isn't always about choosing one identity. Sometimes it's about finally having the freedom to discover one. And perhaps that is what Shiloh is doing now. For almost 20 years, the world has known Shiloh through two of the most famous names in Hollywood. Jolie, Pitt. But now at 20, something has changed. Shiloh is no longer a child whose identity is being defined by her parents. She is an adult beginning to make choices for herself. And dance may be one of the clearest examples of that change. She trained, she performed, she explored choreography, and eventually, she walked into an open audition for a K-pop music video. Not as Angelina Jolie's daughter, not as Brad Pitt's daughter, but as she, a dancer. That doesn't mean Shiloh is trying to erase her family. And we shouldn't pretend to know exactly what she feels about the Jolie Pitt name unless she tells us herself. She was born into extraordinary privilege. Her parents gave her access to opportunities most people could only dream about. But privilege doesn't decide what someone does with those opportunities. And Shiloh appears to be making choices of her own. She could have pursued the traditional Hollywood path. She could have acted. She could have built a career around celebrity. Instead, she seems increasingly interested in a creative world where the work can speak before the family name does. That may be why the K-pop audition matters. Because for once the question wasn't, who are her parents? It was, can she dance? And that is a very different question. For someone who has spent her entire life being recognized before she had a chance to introduce herself, being evaluated for a skill can be powerful. Maybe that's why Shiloh has continued moving toward dance. It gives her a language that doesn't require explanations. She doesn't have to discuss her childhood. She doesn't have to discuss her parents. She doesn't have to explain the Jolie Pitt family. She can simply step onto the floor and perform. Of course, we don't know where this path will lead. Shiloh may become a professional dancer. She may pursue choreography. She may work behind the scenes. Or she may eventually choose something completely different. At 20, she doesn't have to know. And that may be the most important part of this story. The world has spent years asking what Shiloh Jolie Pitt would become. But perhaps we've been asking the wrong question. Maybe that question isn't whether she will become another Hollywood star. Maybe it's whether she can build a life that feels like her own. And the answer may already be emerging. Not through a blockbuster movie. Not through a red carpet. Not through a famous surname. But through a dance studio. An audition, and a young woman willing to walk into a room without telling everyone who her parents are. Because being born as Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt's daughter was never a choice. But deciding what to do with that name is, and perhaps that is Shiloh's real story. She doesn't need to run from Hollywood. She doesn't need to reject her family. She doesn't need to prove that she is different from her parents. She simply needs to discover who she is when the cameras stop asking about them. Maybe she'll become a dancer. Maybe a choreographer. Maybe something none of us can predict. But whatever comes next, it will be hers. For almost 20 years, the world has been watching Shiloh grow up. Now, for the first time, we may finally be watching her choose who she wants to become. Not Brad Pitt's daughter. Not Angelina Jolie's daughter. Not Hollywood royalty. Just Shiloh,